David Chen never thought his biggest problem would be loneliness at 32. He had built what most people would call a perfect life. His small cabin sat on 15 acres of pine forest, far enough from town that he could work in complete silence. The nearest neighbor lived 2 miles away, and that was exactly how David liked it. Every morning started the same way. Coffee first, then a quick walk with Rex, his golden retriever who had been his only companion for the past 3 years. Rex was getting old now, moving slower than before, but he still loved their morning routine. They would walk the same path, through the trees, David checking his phone for work messages while Rex sniffed around for interesting smells. David worked as a software developer for a tech company in the city, but he did everything from home. His computer setup took up most of his living room, with 3 monitors and enough cables to power a small town. He was good at his job, really good. The kind of good that meant he could live anywhere he wanted. As long as he had internet. 2 years ago, things had been different. He lived in the city with his wife, had friends, went to parties. But the divorce changed everything. Not just the paperwork and the lawyers, but something deeper. He stopped wanting to be around people, stopped wanting to explain why he looked sad all the time. The cabin belonged to his grandfather, empty since the old man passed away 5 years earlier. Moving there felt like coming home. The work kept him busy during the day, writing code, fixing bugs, attending video calls with people he barely knew. But evenings were different. That's when the quiet really hit him. He would make dinner, eat while watching old movies, then spend hours reading or just sitting on his porch listening to the forest sounds. Rex was the only one who seemed to understand. The dog would sit next to David's chair, not asking for anything, just being there. Sometimes David would talk to him about work problems or random thoughts. Rex would listen with that patient look dogs have, like he understood every word. On this particular night, David was having trouble with a piece of code that should have been simple, a basic sorting algorithm that kept giving him wrong results. He had been staring at the screen for 2 hours, trying different approaches. Rex was sleeping on his bed in the corner, making small snoring sounds. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but David kept drinking it anyway. He rubbed his eyes and stretched his neck. Maybe he should call it a night and try again tomorrow. But something about giving up bothered him. He had always been stubborn about solving problems, even when it meant staying up too late. That's when he saw the light. At first, it looked like a shooting star. David had seen plenty of those living out here, away from city lights. The night sky was one of the few things that made him feel less alone. But this light was different. Instead of the quick flash of a normal meteor, this one moved slowly across the sky, pulsing with a strange blue glow. David pushed back from his desk and walked to the window. The light was getting brighter, and it seemed to be coming toward his area. Rex had woken up and was now standing beside him, making a low whining sound. "What do you think, boy?" David asked, scratching behind Rex's ears. Probably just a satellite or something. But even as he said it, David knew this wasn't any satellite. The light was too bright, too close. And it was definitely slowing down, like something trying to land rather than just passing through. The impact, when it came, shook the entire cabin. David's coffee mug fell off his desk and shattered on the floor. Rex started barking, running back and forth between David and the front door. Outside, David could hear trees crashing and what sounded like electrical crackling. For a moment, David just stood there. His practical mind was trying to make sense of what had happened. Maybe a small plane had crashed, or a piece of space junk had fallen. He should probably call the police or the fire department, but curiosity won over caution. David grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed for the door. Rex was already there, scratching at the wood and whining. Okay, David said, clipping Rex's leash to his collar. "We'll go look, but we're staying together." The night air was cold against his face as they stepped outside. David could smell smoke and something else, something sharp and metallic. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness as they walked toward the forest. Rex stayed close to his side, alert but not scared. The damage was easy to follow. Broken branches and scattered leaves made a clear path through the trees. David's boots crunched on fallen pine needles as they got closer to whatever had crashed. The metallic smell was getting stronger, and now he could see a faint glow coming from somewhere ahead. Then they found it. The crater was about 20 feet across, perfectly round like someone had used a giant cookie cutter on the forest floor. But what sat in the middle of it made David's brain stop working for a moment. It wasn't a plane or a chunk of metal. It was something that looked like it had been grown rather than built. The craft was roughly the size of a small car, but its surface seemed to shift and move in the flashlight beam. It was covered in patterns that glowed with soft blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The whole thing looked more like a giant seed pod than any kind of vehicle David had ever seen. Rex had stopped barking and was now pressing against David's leg, making small worried sounds. David reached down to pet him, more for his own comfort than the dog's. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if that was true. As they got closer, David could see that part of the craft was damaged. Dark scorch marks covered one side, and there was a crack running along what might have been a window. The blue glow was dimmer in those areas, flickering like a dying light bulb. Then, as if responding to their presence, a section of the craft's surface began to change. It became transparent, then liquid, flowing away like water to reveal an opening. David's flashlight beam fell through the gap, and he saw something that made his heart stop. There was someone inside. She looked human, but not quite. Her skin had a pale, almost luminous quality that seemed to glow from within. Her hair was long and silver, moving gently as if she were underwater. She was wearing what looked like armor made from the same material as the craft, form-fitting and elegant. But what worried David most was that she wasn't moving. Her eyes were closed, and he could see injuries on her face and arms. A cut across her forehead was bleeding something that looked like liquid starlight. Burns along her side pulsed with an unnatural darkness. David stood there for a long moment, his mind racing. This was impossible. People didn't just fall out of the sky in crystal ships. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. Or maybe he was having a breakdown from too much isolation. But the woman's chest was rising and falling slightly. She was breathing, which meant she was alive. And alive meant she needed help. Rex whined and looked up at David, as if asking what they should do. David looked back at the cabin, then at the woman in the strange craft. He could call 911. Let the authorities handle this. That would be the smart thing to do. But something held him back. Maybe it was the way she looked so peaceful despite her injuries. Maybe it was the fear that if he called the police, she would become some kind of experiment. Or maybe it was just that he had been alone for so long that finding another person, even one who had fallen from the sky, felt like a gift David made. His decision. He stepped carefully into the crater, Rex following close behind. The craft's interior was warm and smelled like ozone and flowers. The woman was lighter than he expected, as if her bones were made of something more delicate than calcium. "Come on," he said to Rex as he lifted her carefully. "Let's get her inside." The walk back to the cabin felt like the longest 20 minutes of David's life. The woman remained unconscious, her head resting against his shoulder. Her silver hair felt real enough, soft and warm. Whatever she was, whoever she was hurt and needed help. David kicked open his front door and carried her to the guest's bedroom. He laid her gently on the bed, then stood back and really looked at her for the first time in proper light. The injuries were worse than he had thought. The cut on her forehead was deep, and the burns on her side looked infected with something that definitely wasn't from Earth. He had basic first aid supplies, but nothing that seemed appropriate for someone who had literally fallen from the stars. David did what he could, cleaning the wounds with antiseptic and bandaging them carefully. The whole time, she remained unconscious, breathing slowly but steadily. Rex had claimed the rug beside the bed, apparently deciding that someone needed to keep watch. David pulled a chair over and sat down, trying to process what had just happened. 3 hours ago, his biggest worry was a stubborn piece of code. Now he had an injured alien woman sleeping in his guest room, and he had no idea what to do next. But as he watched her breathe, David realized that for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel alone. Outside, the forest was quiet again. The strange craft still sat in its crater, glowing softly in the darkness, and David Chen, who had spent so long avoiding the world, found himself at the center of something that would change everything. He pulled a blanket over the mysterious woman and settled in to wait. Whatever happened next, he would face it. After all, he had Rex to help him figure it out, and maybe, just maybe, David barely slept that first night. Every few minutes, he would check on the woman in his guest room, making sure she was still breathing. Rex had appointed himself as her guardian, refusing to leave his spot on the rug beside the bed. The dog seemed to sense that something important was happening, something that required his full attention. By morning, David had convinced himself that he was losing his mind. Normal people didn't find aliens in their backyard. Normal people didn't carry unconscious strangers into their homes. But every time he looked at her, lying there with her silver hair spread across his pillow, he knew this was real. The first sign of change came on the second day. David was making coffee in the kitchen when he heard Rex bark once, then fall silent. He rushed to the guest room and found the woman sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Her eyes were the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. They were large and seemed to contain flecks of starlight, changing color from blue to silver to something that had no name. But right now, they were filled with panic. She said something in a language that sounded like music mixed with wind chimes. Her voice was soft but urgent, and she was looking around the room like she was trying to figure out where she was. When she saw David in the doorway, she pressed herself against the headboard, clearly afraid. "Hey, it's okay," David said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him for a long moment, then said something else in her musical language. This time, David caught what sounded like a question in her tone. "I'm David," he said, pointing to himself. "David, you crashed in my forest 2 nights ago. I brought you here to help." The woman watched his mouth carefully as he spoke, like she was trying to understand not just his words but how he made them. After a moment, she pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Lyrale. "Lyrale," David repeated, and she nodded, a small smile crossing her face. It was a start. Over the next few hours, David learned that Lyrale was unlike anyone he had ever met. She seemed to absorb language like a sponge soaking up water. Every word he spoke, she would repeat quietly to herself, testing the sounds. By afternoon, she could say simple phrases like "thank you" and "water, please." But the learning process was clearly difficult for her. David could see the strain on her face when she concentrated too hard. Sometimes she would hold her head in her hands, breathing deeply until the pain passed. He started keeping his conversations simple and slow, giving her time to process each new word. Rex had become completely devoted to her. The old dog would bring her his favorite toys, lay his head on her lap, and watch her with the kind of loyalty David had never seen before. Lyrale seemed to understand that Rex was special, always speaking to him in gentle tones and scratching behind his ears exactly the way he liked. On the third day, Lyrale tried to explain where she came from. She drew pictures on paper, showing David star patterns and what looked like a beautiful city floating in space. Her drawings were incredibly detailed, almost like photographs done with a pencil. "Ethros," she said, pointing to one of the drawings. "My home." David studied the picture. It showed towers that seemed to grow like trees, connected by bridges that looked like they were made of light. People with the same silver hair as Lyrale walked through gardens that floated in the air. "It's beautiful," David said, and Lyrale's face lit up with happiness. But then her expression changed. She drew another picture, this one showing the same city but darker, with ships that looked like metal insects surrounding it. Her hand shook as she drew, and David could see tears forming in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked gently. Lyrale struggled to find the words. "Father," she finally said, and then made a gesture like something being crushed. "Bad, very bad." David didn't need to understand her language to know that something terrible had happened to her home. The pain in her voice was universal, the kind of hurt that came from losing everything you loved. As the days passed, David found himself looking forward to their conversations. Lyrale had a way of seeing things that made him think about his own life differently. She was fascinated by the simplest things, like the way Rex wagged his tail when he was happy, or how coffee smelled different when it was brewing. "Why you live alone?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars. David had been dreading this question. "I used to live with someone," he said carefully. "But she left. We weren't happy together anymore." Lyrale nodded. Thoughtfully, "Sad," she said. "But maybe better alone than with wrong person?" Her words hit David harder than he expected. He had spent so much time feeling sorry for himself that he had forgotten. There might be truth in what she said. "What about you?" he asked. "Did you have someone special on your world?" Lyrale's face grew sad. "Yes, but he chose duty over heart. He chose my father over me." David understood that feeling. The pain of being rejected by someone you trusted, someone you thought would stand by you. They sat in comfortable silence. To people from different worlds who had both learned what it meant to be alone. But David was starting to realize that he wasn't alone anymore. Lyrale needed his help, yes, but she was also helping him in ways she probably didn't understand. Her presence in his quiet house had brought life back to rooms that had felt empty for too long. The breakthrough came. On the seventh day, David was showing Lyrale how to use his computer when she suddenly placed her hand on the screen. The monitor flickered, and lines of code appeared that David had never seen before. "How did you do that?" he asked, amazed. Lyrale smiled, the first truly happy expression he had seen from her. "My people," she said, searching for the right words, "we understand machines, like you understand a Rex." To demonstrate, she touched his broken radio, the one that had been sitting on a shelf gathering dust for months. Immediately, it crackled to life, playing a clear station from the next state over. David stared at her in wonder. "You can fix things just by touching them." "Not fix," Lyrale corrected. "Understand. Machines have feelings, like living things. I speak to them." This revelation changed everything. David realized that Lyrale wasn't just a refugee from another world. She had abilities that could help both of them. More importantly, she was starting to trust him with her secrets. That night, as David was getting ready for bed, he found Lyrale sitting by the window in the guest room, looking out at the forest where her ship still sat in its crater. "You want to go home," he said. It wasn't a question. Lyrale turned to him, and in the moonlight, he could see the conflict in her eyes. "Yes," she said quietly, "but home is gone. Father destroyed it when he chose power over family. Then maybe." David said carefully, "You can make a new home. Here." Lyrale looked at him for a long moment. "Here?" she asked. "Here," David repeated. "With me, if you want." For the first time since she had arrived, Lyrale smiled without sadness. "I want," she said simply. David felt something shift inside his chest, like a door opening after being locked for a long time. He had spent 2 years running from connections, from the possibility of being hurt again. But looking at Lyrale, he realized that some risks were worth taking. Outside, the forest was quiet except for the gentle glow of her ship in the distance. Inside, two lonely people from different worlds had found something neither had expected to find again: hope. 3 weeks had passed since Lyrale crashed into David's quiet world, and the cabin felt completely different. What used to be a place of solitude had become alive with conversation, laughter, and the gentle hum of alien technology that Lyrale was slowly repairing. David found himself waking up earlier each morning, not because he had to, but because he was excited to see what Lyrale would discover that day. She had an amazing way of finding wonder in the simplest things. Yesterday, she had spent an hour watching a spider build its web, fascinated by what she called tiny engineering. "Your world is full of artists," she had told him, pointing to the spider. "But they don't know they are artists." This morning, David made coffee for both of them, adding the honey that Lyrale preferred. She couldn't handle the bitterness of plain coffee. But with honey, she said it tasted like sunshine. In a cup. Her way of describing things always made David smile. He found her in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to her ship's communication device. She had been working on it for days, trying to contact someone she called the good ones from her world. Rex was lying beside her, occasionally lifting his head when the device made interesting sounds. "Any luck today?" David asked, settling down beside her with their coffee. Lyrali shook her head. But she wasn't frustrated. Over the past weeks, David had learned that she faced problems with incredible patience. "The signal is weak," she explained. "But I feel them out there. My friends are looking for me." David nodded, though part of him hoped the signal would stay weak a little longer. He wasn't ready to lose her yet. The thought surprised him with its intensity. Their daily routine had become comfortable and natural. David would work on his computer projects while Lyrali repaired her ship. They would eat lunch together, with Lyrali asking questions about human culture and David learning about life among the stars. Evenings were spent on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. But lately, David had noticed something changing between them, small moments that felt charged with meaning. When Lyrali handed him tools, their fingers would brush, and both of them would pause. When she laughed at his jokes, her whole face would light up in a way that made his heart race. "David," Lyrali said, looking up from her work, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "When your wife left, did you think you would never love again?" The question caught David off guard. Yes, I thought I was done with all that. It hurt too much." Lyrali nodded thoughtfully. "On my world, we have a saying. The heart that has been broken knows how to mend others. I think maybe your broken heart helped you save me." David felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Maybe you saved me too." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them felt electric. But then Lyrali's communication device suddenly crackled to life, breaking the spell. She turned back to it quickly, but David caught the blush on her cheeks. Over the next few days, these moments became more frequent. David would catch himself watching Lyrali as she worked, amazed by her grace and intelligence. She seemed to sense his attention, often looking up to meet his eyes with a smile that made him forget whatever he was supposed to be doing. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening. David was cooking dinner while Lyrali read one of his books, her legs tucked under her on the couch. Rex was sleeping peacefully by the fire, making small contented sounds. "This story is sad," Lyrali said, holding up the book. "Why do humans write sad stories?" David looked over at her. "I guess because sad stories help us understand that we're not alone in our pain. They make us feel connected to other people." Lyrali considered this. "On Ethros, we tell stories to remember joy. But I think maybe human way is better. Sharing. Sadness makes it smaller. Is that what you're doing? Sharing your sadness with me?" She set down the book and looked at him seriously. "Yes, but you are sharing yours with me too. It makes us both stronger." David turned off the stove and walked over to sit beside her. "Lyrali, I need to tell you something." She waited patiently, her starlight eyes focused on his face. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it's complicated, and I know you might have to leave, but I can't pretend I don't feel it anymore." Lyrali's expression softened. "David, on my world, we don't fall in love. We grow into it, like plants growing toward the sun. I have been growing toward you since the day I woke up in your care." She reached out and took his hand, and David felt a warmth that seemed to come from inside her very skin. "But I must tell you something too. Loving someone from my world is different. We feel emotions more deeply. When I touch you, I can sense what you feel. When you are happy, I feel your joy. When you are sad, I feel your pain. Does that scare you?" David asked. "No," Lyrali said, squeezing his hand. "It makes me feel closer to you than I have ever felt to anyone." David lifted his other hand to touch her face, and Lyrali closed her eyes, leaning into his palm. Her skin was warm and seemed to glow softly under his touch. "I love you too," she whispered. When they kissed, it was gentle and sweet, full of All the words they hadn't said and all the feelings they had been trying to understand. David felt a connection deeper than anything he had experienced before, as if their souls were speaking to each other in a language that needed no words. But their happiness was interrupted by a sudden, harsh sound from Liralay's communication device. She pulled away from David, her face immediately filled with concern. "What is it?" David asked. Liralay rushed to the device, her hands moving quickly over its surface. The sounds it was making were sharp and urgent, completely different from the gentle tones it usually produced. "It's a message," she said, her voice tight with worry, "from my friend Captain Zara." She listened intently, her face growing pale. When the message ended, she looked at David with fear in her eyes. "What did she say?" David asked. "My father's forces are expanding faster than anyone thought. 3 more star systems have been destroyed. Billions of people are gone." Liralay's voice was shaking. "And there's something else. He's put a bounty on my head. He's telling everyone I have secrets that could destroy Ethros." David felt his heart sink. "Do you have secrets? I mean," Liralay nodded sadly. "I know the locations of all the rebel bases. I know which governors are planning to join the resistance. If my father captures me, he can destroy the only hope my people have. Then we make sure he doesn't capture you," David said firmly. "David, you don't understand. He's sending hunters, the best trackers in the galaxy. They won't stop until they find me." David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the forest where her ship sat hidden among the trees. "How long do we have?" "I don't know. Days, maybe weeks, but they will come." David turned back to her, and Liralay was surprised to see determination in his eyes instead of fear. "Then we better get your ship ready to fly. You want me to leave?" she asked, hurt evident in her voice. "No," David said, walking back to her. "I want us to be ready for whatever comes, together." Liralay looked at him with amazement. "You would fight for me? Even against enemies you don't understand? I would fight for you against anything." David said simply, "Because I love you, and because some things are worth fighting for." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean. Inside the cabin, 2 people from different worlds held each other close, knowing that their peaceful time was coming to an end. But they also knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The quiet life David had built was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. David had always been a light sleeper, but for the past week, every small sound made him jump. Rex seemed to sense the tension too, spending more time looking out the windows and less time napping. The old dog's ears would perk up at the slightest noise from the forest, as if he knew something was coming. Liralay worked on her ship with new urgency. Her movements were faster, more focused. She had explained to David that her ship's engines were almost ready, but the weapons systems were still damaged. "If they find us before I finish the repairs," she had said quietly, "we will have to run without being able to fight back." David spent his days helping however he could, bringing her tools and learning about technology that seemed like magic to him. But mostly, he found himself memorizing everything about her. The way she hummed softly while she worked, how she always paused to pet Rex when he brought her his toys, the small crease that appeared between her eyebrows when she was concentrating. He was afraid they were running out of time. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. David was making breakfast when Rex started barking frantically at the kitchen window. Not his usual alert bark, but something deeper, more worried. David looked outside and saw what had upset the dog. The birds were gone. The forest, which was usually alive with the sounds of chirping and wing beats, had fallen completely silent. Even the squirrels that normally chattered in the trees were nowhere to be seen. It was as if every animal in the area had suddenly decided to hide. "Liralay," David called, trying to keep his voice calm. "I think you should see this." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, took one look at David's face, and immediately went to the window. Her expression changed instantly. "They're here," she whispered. "How can you tell?" "Animals always know first. They can sense the hunting ships before we can see them." Liralay's hands were shaking slightly. "David, We need to get to my ship. Now, they grabbed the emergency bag David had packed days earlier and ran toward the forest. Rex close behind them, Liralay's ship sat in its crater, looking almost ready to fly. She had worked miracles with the damaged systems, but David could see that some repairs were still incomplete. How long until it's ready? He asked. 20 minutes, maybe 30, Liralay said, her hands already moving over the ship's controls. But I don't think we have that long. As if to prove her point, the sky above them began to shimmer. David watched in amazement as 3 large shapes began to appear, like invisible buildings becoming solid. The hunting ships were sleek and dark, nothing like Liralay's organic-looking craft. These looked built for one purpose, finding and capturing their prey. A voice boomed from the largest ship, speaking in Liralay's musical language. But even without understanding the words, David could hear the authority and determination in the speaker's tone. What's he saying? David asked. Liralay's face had gone pale. It's Commander Thane. He was supposed to marry me, before I discovered what my father was planning. She listened to more of the announcement. He's demanding that I surrender. He says if I come peacefully, he won't harm the primitive human who's been harboring me. David felt a surge of anger. Primitive human? David, listen to me. Liralay grabbed his shoulders, her eyes intense. Thane is a good person, but he's completely loyal to my father. He truly believes he's saving me from making a terrible mistake. That makes him more dangerous than someone who's just cruel. The voice from the ship spoke again, this time in heavily accented English. Princess Liralay, I know you can hear me. I have no desire to hurt you or your friend, but I have my orders. Surrender now, and I promise no harm will come to either of you. Liralay looked at David with pain in her eyes. He means it. Thane would never lie about something like that. But if you go with him, what happens to your people? What happens to all those worlds your father wants to destroy? I don't know, Liralay admitted. Maybe nothing can stop him now. David thought about everything Liralay had told him over the past weeks. The destroyed worlds, the billions of people who had already died, the rebels who were counting on her to help them fight back. He thought about the woman he had fallen in love with, who was willing to sacrifice everything to save others. No, he said firmly. We're not giving up. How much time do you need to get the ship running, David? Even if I could get it started, they have 3 ships. We can't outrun them all. Maybe we don't have to outrun them. Maybe we just have to confuse them long enough for you to call for help. Liralay stared at him. What are you thinking? David looked around the forest, his mind racing. He had grown up in these woods, knew every trail and hiding spot. I'm thinking that they might know how to fly spaceships, but they don't know anything about Earth forests, or about humans who refuse to give up. The ships were getting closer now, their dark shapes blocking out the morning sun. David could see smaller craft detaching from the main vessels, probably scouts looking for the exact location of Liralay's ship. I can create a distraction, David said. Draw them away from here while you finish the repairs and try to contact your rebel friends. Absolutely not, Liralay said immediately. David, these are trained soldiers. They have weapons that could destroy this entire forest. Then we better make sure I don't get caught. Rex, who had been listening to their conversation with the alert expression he got when he sensed something important happening, suddenly barked once and ran toward the edge of the crater. Both David and Liralay turned to see what had caught his attention. Commander Thane himself was walking through the trees toward them, flanked by 2 soldiers in sleek armor. He was tall and impressive, with the same silver hair as Liralay but shorter, and more military in style. His uniform was pristine, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never failed in a mission. When he saw Liralay, his expression softened with what looked like genuine relief. Liralay, he said in English, clearly for David's benefit, thank the stars are alive. When your ship disappeared, we feared the worst. Hello, Thane, Liralay replied quietly. You look well, as do you, despite everything. Thane's eyes moved to David, and his expression became more cautious. Is this the human who has been caring for you? His name is David, Liralay said, and yes, he saved my life. Thane inclined his head slightly toward David. Then you have my gratitude, David of Earth, but now I must ask you to step aside. The princess needs to come home. She is home, David said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Thane's eyebrows rose. I beg your pardon, you heard me. She's home, here, with me. She doesn't want to go back to a world where her father destroys entire civilizations for profit. You don't understand the complexities of galactic politics. Thane said, his tone still polite but with an edge of steel. Lyrale has been influenced by rebel propaganda. She needs proper counseling to remember her duties. Her duties? David stepped forward, his fear forgotten in the face of his anger. Her duty is to protect innocent people, not to stand by while they're murdered. Thane's hand moved to his weapon, and his soldiers tensed. You will not speak of the Emperor in such terms. The Emperor, David said, is a monster. And if you can't see that, then you're either blind or you're just as bad as he is. The forest fell silent except for the low hum of the hunting ships overhead. Thane stared at David with a mixture of surprise and something that might have been respect. You would stand against the most powerful empire in the galaxy for one woman, Thane asked. I'd stand against the universe for her, David replied without hesitation. Lyrale looked at David with amazement and love, but also with growing fear. She could see the tension building between the two men, and she knew that Thane's patience wouldn't last much longer. Enough, she said, stepping between them. Thane, you say you want to protect me. Then listen to what I'm telling you. My father is destroying innocent worlds. Children are dying while we stand here talking. How can you call that justice? Thane's expression wavered for just a moment, and David saw doubt flicker in his eyes. But then the commander's training reasserted itself. The Emperor's decisions are not mine to question, Thane said firmly. And they are not yours either. Princess, you will come with me now. Willingly or otherwise, Rex, who had been watching the exchange with growing agitation, suddenly growled low in his throat. The old dog positioned himself between David and the soldiers, his protective instincts overriding his fear. Even your beast understands loyalty. Thane observed, perhaps you should learn from it. That was the moment David realized talking wasn't going to work. Thane was too well-trained, too committed to his duty to be swayed by arguments. If they were going to escape, it would have to be through action, not words. David caught Lyrale's eye and gave her the smallest nod toward her ship. She understood immediately and began backing slowly toward the crater. One last chance, Princess, Thane said. Come home with honor or be taken as a prisoner. I am home, Lyrale said softly, but it's not the home you remember. And then everything happened at once. David had never considered himself a hero. In fact, he had spent the last 2 years of his life avoiding any situation that might require courage. But as he watched Thane's soldiers raise their weapons toward Lyrale, something inside him snapped. Rex, run, he shouted, and threw himself sideways into the nearest soldier. The forest exploded into chaos. Energy beams cut through the air where David had been standing, setting small fires in the dry leaves. Rex barked frantically and darted between the trees, confused but trying to help. Lyrale sprinted toward her ship, her hands already working on the emergency startup sequence. David had no training in combat, but he had desperation and the home field advantage. He rolled behind a fallen log as more energy blasts scorched the ground around him. The soldiers were clearly trying not to kill him, which was probably the only reason he was still alive. Stop this foolishness, Thane called out. You cannot win against trained warriors. Maybe not, David shouted back, but I can make it really annoying for you. He grabbed a handful of dirt and small rocks, throwing them at the nearest soldier's helmet. It was a ridiculous gesture, but it bought Lyrale a few more precious seconds. Then David heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the gentle hum of Lyrale's ship coming to life. David, she called, I'm ready. But as David tried to run toward the ship, Thane stepped into his path. The commander's weapon was drawn, but he wasn't pointing it at David. I don't want to hurt you, Thane said sincerely, but I cannot allow you to take her. You're not taking her either, David replied, breathing hard. They stared at each other for a moment. to men from different worlds who both thought they were doing the right thing. That's when the sky lit up with new ships. These vessels were different from Thane's hunting craft. They were smaller, faster, and they moved with the fluid grace of Liralay's ship. David counted at least 6 of them, appearing from seemingly nowhere. The rebels, Liralay breathed, hope filling her voice. A new voice crackled through the forest air, speaking in the musical language of Ethros. Thane's expression changed from confidence to concern as he listened. What are they saying? David asked. Captain Zera is demanding that Thane release me immediately, Liralay translated. She's saying that the Emperor has been declared a war criminal by the Galactic Council. Thane spoke rapidly into his communicator, clearly trying to get orders from his superiors. But David could see the doubt growing in the commander's eyes as more rebel ships appeared in the sky. Thane, Liralay said gently, walking toward him with her hands raised peacefully. It's over. The whole galaxy knows what my father has done. Even some of his own generals are turning against him. That's impossible, Thane said. But his voice lacked conviction. One of the rebel ships landed in the clearing, and a woman with silver hair and kind eyes stepped out. She wore the same type of armor as Liralay, but hers was marked with symbols that David guessed meant she was a captain. Hello, old friend, she said to Thane in English. Thane's weapon lowered slightly. Zera, I should have known you would be involved in this. The Thane I grew up with would never serve a tyrant, Zera replied. The question is, what happened to that man? For a long moment, the forest was silent except for the hum of ships overhead. David watched Thane's face as the commander struggled with everything he had believed in. Finally, Thane's shoulders sagged in defeat. Show me the evidence, he said. Quietly, what happened next was like watching someone's world fall apart and rebuild itself at the same time. Zera showed Thane recordings of the destroyed worlds, testimonies from survivors, and official documents proving the Emperor's crimes, with each piece of evidence. Thane seemed to age years. When it was over, the proud commander looked broken. I have served a monster, he whispered. You served your duty as you understood it, Liralay said compassionately. But now you know the truth. The question is, what will you do with it? Thane looked at her, then at David, then at the rebel ships filling the sky. I will do what I should have done long ago. I will choose what is right over what is easy. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Thane not only joined the rebellion, but brought valuable intelligence. About the Emperor's military plans, David found himself in the strange position of offering strategic advice to alien rebels. His experience with human military tactics proving surprisingly useful. But through it all, David kept thinking about what would happen next. The rebellion needed Liralay. Her knowledge, her leadership, her very presence as a symbol of resistance against tyranny. And that meant she would have to leave Earth. I have to go with them, Liralay said that evening as they sat on the porch one last time. The rebel ships were parked in his forest like metallic flowers, and the sight should have been amazing. Instead, David felt his heart breaking. I know, he said simply. I could stay, she offered. Let someone else lead the rebellion. David took her hand, feeling the warm glow of her skin against his. No, you couldn't. It's not who you are. You're not the kind of person who runs away from responsibility. But I don't want to lose you. David was quiet for a moment, watching Rex sniff round one of the rebel ships with scientific curiosity. What if you didn't have to? Liralay looked at him with confusion. What do you mean? I mean, what if I came with you? David, no, you don't understand what you're saying. This could take years. We might not win. You could die far from home, fighting in a war that isn't even yours. It became my war the moment they threatened you, David said firmly. Besides, you said it yourself weeks ago. Some things are worth fighting for. But your life here, your work, your home. David looked around at the cabin that had been his refuge for 2 years. It was a good place, a peaceful place. But it wasn't home anymore. Home was wherever Liralay was. This was never really living, he said. This was just hiding. You taught me the difference. Liralay's eyes filled with tears. But she was smiling. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The rebellion lasted 3 years. David's tactical knowledge and fresh perspective proved invaluable in planning operations against an enemy that had grown complacent after centuries of easy victories, but more than that. His presence gave Lyrale the emotional strength she needed to become the leader her people needed. They fought in battles among the stars, helped evacuate entire planets, and slowly build a coalition strong enough to challenge the Emperor's power. David learned to pilot alien ships, to understand technology beyond his wildest dreams, and to think on a scale that encompassed entire solar systems. But the best moments were still the quiet ones. Nights when he and Lyrale would sit together, on whatever ship or station they were calling home, talking about the future they were fighting to build. The Emperor's defeat came not through a single great battle, but through the gradual collapse of his support as world after world joined the rebellion. When the end came, it was almost anticlimactic. The tyrant was wrested by his own former allies, brought before a galactic court, and sentenced to exile on a remote world where he could harm no one ever again. Lyrale could have claimed her father's throne. The people would have welcomed her as their new empress, but she had learned too much about the corrupting nature of absolute power. Instead, she helped establish a democratic council that would govern through cooperation rather than force. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair, and it was a start. So what now? David asked as they stood on the observation deck of the space station that served as the new government's headquarters. Through the transparent walls, they could see dozens of different ships from hundreds of worlds, all working together. Now we find somewhere to build a life, Lyrale said, leaning against his shoulder. Somewhere we can have a garden and maybe some children who will grow up in a galaxy where might doesn't make right. That sounds perfect, David said. But I have one condition. What's that? We need to get a dog. Preferably one that's good with alien technology, Lyrale laughed, the sound filling the observation deck with music. I think that can be arranged. They eventually settled on a frontier world where David established a center for interspecies technological cooperation. Lyrale worked as a diplomatic liaison, helping to resolve conflicts between worlds that were still learning to trust each other. It was important work, but it allowed them to have the quiet life they both craved. Their children, when they came, were remarkable beings who inherited the best of both their parents. They could communicate with machines like their mother and think strategically like their father. But most importantly, they grew up understanding that being different wasn't something to fear, but something to celebrate. Years later, when David was old and his hair had turned as silver as Lyrale's, they would sit in their garden and watch their grandchildren play among flowers that bloomed in colors that had no names on Earth. Sometimes, visitors from distant worlds would ask David if he ever regretted leaving his home planet to fight in an alien war. I didn't leave home, he would always answer, taking Lyrale's still glowing hand in his own. I found it. The cabin in the woods remained, maintained by David's sister as a historical landmark. A simple plaque by the door read, "Here, too." Lonely people from different worlds found that love could bridge any distance.